Okay, like I was talking about before, one of the more important things you need to do when you're making a homebrew is cool it down as fast as possible. If you want clear beer when it's done, I mean, it's not going to taste bad necessarily if it's cloudy, but if you want clear beer, one of the more important things you need to do is cool the wort off as fast as possible. One of the reasons you'd want to do this is, number one, it's going to separate the proteins from the wort. All those proteins are going to settle to the bottom, and when you do that, that means there's going to be less proteins floating around in your beer, so it'll be clear. Number two is, the faster you can cool your beer down, or your wort down. If I didn't explain it, wort is the term used for unfermented beer. Basically a malty, sugary solution that yeast hasn't been introduced into yet, and hasn't turned into basically an alcoholic malt beverage. The faster you can cool your wort off, the better, because that means the faster you can get the yeast into it. When the yeast starts eating the sugars and creating what the end product is going to be beer, that means that the faster you do it, the less likely it will be for any sort of infection or foreign substance to try to take over the beer. Now, as far as beer infections, I've never had one. I'm fairly meticulous about sanitizing everything. It does happen. Now, as far from what I've read, there's no beer infection that will kill you if you drink it. It's basically just going to take your beer and make it taste bad. So, one of the things you can do to cool your beer off faster, there's two ways you can cool your beer off. Actually, three. The first is just to let it sit and cool down, which is going to take forever. The second way is to sit your brew kettle or whatever vessel you brew in an ice bath in your sink, your bathtub, whatever. That's going to take a lot of ice. It's going to take water, and it's going to be slower. You're going to have to stir the wort up just to kind of facilitate cooling it down. The third and more efficient way, and there are other ways. There's immersion chillers. There's several different chillers you can use to cool your wort off faster. But what I use is basically called a wort chiller. You can make one yourself out of just copper tubing. You can buy them. At the time when I bought mine, or when I made mine, it was cheaper to make one than to buy one. A lot of them use 10 to 25 feet of copper tubing, and basically it just acts as a radiator. You hook it up to your faucet, and you pump water straight out of your faucet through it, and then it's got a discharge tube which discharges all the water. Basically, it's a basic heat exchanger. So you're pumping cold water in. At first, hot water will come out because that copper is going to be absorbing the heat from your wort. And really, it does. It acts like a radiator in a car. But this is what it looks like. This is mine. It's not super pretty. It doesn't look like one you would buy. It's similar, but I hand formed it myself. This one's actually 50 feet of copper tubing, and like I said, most of them are 25 feet. At the time, I bought a 50-foot roll of copper, and it's about $25 if I remember correctly. Right now, if you go buy a wort chiller, you're going to pay $40 to $50 for a 25-foot wort chiller. Copper's gone up in price just because of the economy. All building supplies have gone up, so at this point, it might be cheaper to actually go buy one. This, like I said, this one's about twice the length as one you would buy. And it might be overkill, it might not be, but it does the job. Basically, what you want to do when you're going to chill your wort is you're going to take this, and this, you know, I've talked about sanitizing everything. This needs to be sanitized too. But the good thing about it is, before your wort quits boiling, it doesn't necessarily have to be sanitized. It needs to be clean, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't need to be sanitized with sanitizer. So what I usually do, and what most people do, is to take your wort chiller, add it into your boil with about 20 minutes left. What this is going to do is, since that wort is boiling, it's just like anything else. You're going to boil this, and it's basically going to sanitize it itself. So add this in 20 minutes before the end of your boil. Submerge it. What I usually have to do is turn up the heat on my propane burner, and what this does, whenever you put this in, it's gonna cool the mixture off. So if you turn up the heat before you put it in, it's going to raise that temperature. It's not going to get more than 212 degrees, because that's basically as hot as water can get at normal atmospheric temperatures, or atmospheric pressure. So turn that up and then slowly lower this into your brew kettle, and that way it won't kill your boil, but just add it slowly and it won't quit boiling, and you'll have your heat up. Once you get it immersed, you can kind of feather your heat back off, and that way it won't start foaming up and boil over. But that's going to sanitize this. When we get to the point where at the end of our boil, I'll show you how this works. It's really neat, it's simple. I'll try to explain a little bit more about the hops too. As I said before, we added the Simcoe hops, which are going to be the bittering hops. You add those at the first of your boil. Every recipe pretty much follows the same steps. Now, when it comes to aroma and flavor hops, it's a little bit different. You can add them in, some might be 20 minutes before, some might be 5 minutes before the end of the boil. On this particular one, I believe what the hop schedule calls for is half an ounce of Simcoe, half an ounce of crystal hops at 15 minutes before the end of the boil. And then we add another full ounce of Simcoe hops and a full ounce of crystal with 5 minutes left. And basically the 15-minute addition before the end of the boil is going to give you some flavor. The 5-minute addition with the hops, it's going to be more about aroma. What you smell whenever you pop that beer open, it's going to give you that the nose of the beer. It's going to really add to that. It's not going to add as much flavor because you don't extract as much of those hop oils out of it, because it's not being boiled as long. So we've got about roughly 15 minutes before we add that. So basically the steps right now, at 20 minutes we're going to add the wort chiller. At 15 minutes we're going to add the second addition of hops, which is the half ounce. At 10 minutes we're going to add the Irish moss according to the directions on the Irish moss. And then at 5 minutes we're going to add the other 2 ounces of hops, which are going to be the aroma hops. Once you get to the end of your boil, you're going to want to cut your propane off, and then take your brew kettle over and hook it up to your faucet and get that water flowing through it as fast as possible. You can whirlpool it with a spoon, and I'll show you that. You'll want your thermometer handy so you can get an accurate temperature on it. We're going to want to get the wort down to about 80 degrees, 75. I usually like to go a little cooler, towards the 70 to 75 degree range. If you want your yeast to start faster, it'll be warmer. You don't want it too warm or it'll kill the yeast. You don't want it too cold or the yeast will lag behind. We made the yeast starter, so it's probably going to start pretty fast. Okay, we've got it's about 20 minutes left in the boil, 21 minutes. It's right before we add our wort chiller. So basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead, check and make sure it's not foaming up real bad. I'm going to turn up the heat. This is probably going to get louder. So I've turned up the heat. Now I'm just waiting for a few, probably 10-15 seconds. I'm going to let the wort, it won't get hotter, but it'll, maybe the brew kettle will heat up a little more. We're going to add this in slowly. Now remember, I still have my hops in this hop bag attached to this wire to save it. So I've kind of got to put it in there and kind of avoid that. I like to try to put the hop bag in the middle of the wort chiller when I put this in. That way it isn't trapped against the side. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Be careful when you do this. If there's any water left in your wort chiller, I kind of like to try to blow this out, try to get as much water out of it as possible, because I store it outside, and in the winter it will freeze and it will bust your copper pipe. So try to make sure to keep your hand clear of the at both ends really, but mainly this discharge end, because it'll start steaming, it'll start dripping, and it's going to be really hot liquid. So I'm going to put that in. And like I said, just lower it real slow. You want to make sure this is clean. It doesn't have to be sanitized, but it needs to be clean. We've got 16 minutes left. That means that our next hop addition, which is going to be the half ounce Simcoe and Crystal, is coming up here in about 1 minute. I've already got it pre-measured. I can't say that enough. Make sure you have everything ready, because if you happen to get busy or you're having to watch for a boiler or whatever, you don't want to be running around looking for your ingredients. So I always try to make sure I pre-measure everything, get it in separate containers. It's all ready to go. So when it's time to add those hops or whatever it may be, make sure you have them ready and you can just put them in. And drop it right back in there. Our next step is going to be this Irish moss. As you remember, I mixed this up with water. I've shaken it several times. You can tell it's nice and dissolved, still cloudy. There's no chunks, so it should be ready to go. Okay, since we got about 10 minutes, 7 seconds left. Got my Irish moss here. You want to dump it in. There's nothing special to this. 10 minutes. Dump it in there. I thought that was funny to mention. I've always thought about this when I'm brewing beer, is a wort chiller looks an awful lot to people like something that you might use to make moonshine. So you might not want to just flaunt it around. Even though making homebrew beer is not illegal, you probably wouldn't want the hassle of somebody calling the police on you. So anyway, we got about 1 minute left, probably less than that. It's like about 30 seconds. It's our last hops addition. Hops smell so good. Take these hops, try to get them all in the bag the best we can. It's not going to mess you up if you don't get them in the bag, if it goes straight into the wort. Those went in fairly well. It won't mess you up if you don't get them directly into the bag. If you get them into the wort itself, that's the traditional way of doing it, is just dumping the hops in there. If I'm not making a really hoppy beer, generally I like to just dump them in there. If I'm using a lot of hops, I like to use the bag, because there's just so much trub that ends up in the bottom. So basically my rule of thumb, if I'm making a beer that uses around 2 ounces of hops, I'll just dump them in. This one has, I can't remember exactly, I believe it's 6 or 7 ounces of hops. So there's going to be a lot of hops in there. So I'm using the bag. So a few minutes left in the boil, probably about 4 minutes by now. As soon as that timer goes off, I'm going to cut the heat, and then I'm going to carry it over right down my carport. I've got a outside faucet there. I'm going to hook up this wort chiller as quick as I can, get it going. This time of year, the ground temperature, it's February, so the water that's coming out of the city water system is going to be really cool. So it's going to cool the wort off a lot faster than it will in the summertime. If you think about if you're using an ice bath to cool your beer down, you're probably going to spend 30 to 45 minutes cooling it down. This time of year, when it's really cool outside, I've noticed that the groundwater is going to be around 50 degrees or so, and I can actually get my wort cooled off from boiling around 200, 212 degrees down to about 80, 75 degrees in about 5 minutes or so. So like I said, the faster you can get it cooled off, the better.